Shalom aleichem. قدم توخون و برختا. مقام شارخلا ساعت زغدو تبين متخنن قد اخنن Samad worships Itlan translation. So we do have translation, Assyrian to English for the worship part as well, for whoever is interested. Gushi shaqlitun in magubetun. شارخ لسات زغدوتن بتقارن نخون كما جرجم مزمور خمشيش تا جاكت خال أربعة مخلطا رحم علي يا الله بعد قم دايش لي برناشا كل يوم بلاشنا مليوسينا قم دشيلي دجمني كل يوم بعد رابنا بالشان أمي بختيروتا يومد زادن أنا بيوخ بتسبرن بعلاها آفت که خاقرن همزمانه بعلاها سپری لزادن مودي ماسا عابد برناشا إلي من مجد دمارا نيشم شيخة إلي علاهن وتكبرانن لتلن التزدوتا من هيج من يوهج ناشا شعلا خلقلن خقرخ وزمرخ زمرتا أمالها بقدم تویمون بسم الله خون با این طالبن من كلن تن ما كبخ ريشان وصلوتا الله هم بابا مارانيشم شيخة بابا اینجا بارا ملكه بريانة شمية وآرقة آفت قد بخيم زمانوخ عدوني بريالوخ وشول من دي ضلو لعلهي عاد يفيد من مجد جبارة يفيد خالاها بخلانا يوفن فيد برقانا بتخاطر اختيات ديان بشلوخ مخيال سقيبها إنا قملوخ واختياتهم بخليلوخ وديو يوم علهي چون با ناشخ بختایخ این اد مارد اختیاتان ما یخلون قمقلات دیو خطال بخالتا بتبخلتان وديو يوم هراش ولا بعده بطلاب خايخيته خلطان شجوا عمالا جو تخمنياتن بخلتون عليه بايخ قد عابد نغزة قاتن قد مجر خيخ إن من أرخى بليتخ ما تتن على أرخى دوز أرخى قد أخشي بتاعي لبرديوخ على هم بابا بطانا منطقة شل برشات قد يوفد قاتن وديو يومه قمت شل سلاماتويتا قدام سخ عوق لخ عموي داله مخ أخوات و خطواتي جديوخ مخ خاك شلپد جديوخ عليه زقدخلوخ شاكرخلوخ تخمنياتن دردن شل چاتونياتن زدوتان ما يخلق مقلات ديوخ و طالبخ قد آتنا ود أمان اون قديوخ اتلن برناش مو چامس عود قاتن عليه بطانا من نوخ قد شل برچات دیو وید قد جو خیوتن عليه هایر قد همه شدان تخمونخ بعضدن من دیان قد قاتن یو وید خزخ قد شما زوده برچات یو وید قاتن ده من دیان قد لتلن آتن مخبابه بدايت مو قديان لازم لموليله اخنا راو من دیان بطلابخ اینا آتن بدايت مو قخيرن له اللهم بابا بطانا من قدا أطرب رختا قد برستت قد يوفت لقى شلونتن قد بازادوتا زق دخلوخ شاكراخلوخ مسخ شوخال شموخ بارخلا بطانا من قد شل خلمت شرد يدعي تاينا سورو جوره همه شهلون لبت خلمت اد مارد شد مسلی لگانو اد بد مسقت و شد مسق لگانو اد بد ماخت علارا هایر قد آوه خلمت شرد قد بخاروخ چوبه شو شولد لازم له شو شولد طلبت منن و دخل عليه الان بابا سالون سلوتا قد شل دن قد لنا لخه بشول تتبرشت دي لعاد ويامه هايرون تجبرون هاير قد خايا خيتا داري البيته وشريكي امان بطلام قد عبد من شل من ملتي شو قنجيت دا دنيا عليه عاد ويامه عاد protect ودلون عاد هلون هيفي عليه وتكبرون بطلام منو قد عبد قاشيشن شل پته وشل خلمت شعر دايت عليه وخارتي شل باين اوديو بريشاي داود من چاروزان قد شو همزمند قد پلاتنا من پومو اوي رزاي ديوخ و اوي قخوق ريقار ديوخ الان بابا ساعت زغدوت و چارزوتا متوين قمقلات ديوخ شولن طلبيات بطلابم شمت مارانيشم شيخه افت قد ملبله ادان صالح تنخ بابن بشميه پايش قجه شموخ اتيا ملچوتو هاوه رزايوخ داخيد بشميه و ارآ هلن لخمه سنقانه و ديومه شقلن خوبن داخيد و بخلن شرقلن دينن داره لا مورتان جيرابا إلا باسيلان من بيشة سبب ديوخي لا ملچوتا خيلا تجبخت العبد بدين آمين أديا وين طالب من شلون تن شالخ لقلان زمرخ ترز مريات آموي دال
Amen.
pardon تویمون بسمالو خون ادیا دیتله سامد زاغدوتا قد دفخان ما يخلق قم حضوره بكل اللبن وبكل مسيطان باين طالبا من عشيرهم بسمالو خون بغدي لخه جميلة دفخ اکی پخ ریشم مسلوطا الان بابا ما را ایشم شیخ خای خیته بیتاخم حضور و خلاهی و بطلاو وخ قدا دفخت پیش لجمیا مزیدت برچاتو تبختون جاو و هایرد یا وتن عقل دارو تقدر شی بیتایله من ماسیات تبیوخ و هیمانوت الله قد بدأ عقل دارو تمبلخ خلا دفخه قبل خانه ديوخ قال بلتت شلون ديوخ قماي قد لاخشي اخنا ما خاي چلپت دونتت بول خانه خزخلي اینا generations قد بيتاينا سلسلة قد بيتاينا عبيلون خبيتا قدام سي زغديلو والشاكري الچول برچاتت قد يوفت قاتن چول انا بطلابم شمد مارن هيشوم شيخا امين مدرش لما الچولن توخون بشينا قابولن قچوله اللي هيفي مخمشة ساتد زاغدوتا وچارزوتا ويهجتد برچات قچولن تن أنا شما مقبريات قاتوخ مدنون هات غزيلو خوندان بزمار خايخي تمتخن قد مقبريات قد هم شايدينا regular إنا يعني الپردش متخلون ادیش ما مقبريات زودم ديانا قاتوخ مدنو وی خمزومه بعض بایبل ستادیز ارزو نقوه قخا خدانا عده و هرت خدمودیلان قطعهم بایخ و شارخ والون و بید شارخلون جو شبت جانیوری تلای بیرخه یعنی ویل خارت جانیوری بمپال early February in-person Bible studies قوی والم پارسوپایید هم و با این تنخون قد دستت ارزه به جامعات لوشیبانه من شوه الأجا بلیلی و دستت بختاته به جامعه آرپاشیبانه خدیسر هل خبر چاوترا قد به جامعه و همزمی بلیشان سویرای و هر بدانا دستت بختاته یومان خمشوشیبانه من شوه الأجا بلیلی داو بلیشان انگلیش بس تردان بختای آرپاشیبانه خدیسر الخا سویرای خمشوشیبانه شوه الأجا بلیلی انگلیش خا بایبل ستادی خیت از قبختات لخموز یدخ قد ایل یومانت لوشی با مورشسات اسرا پلیه التریه سربلیشان انگلیش این لام سیتون شریکیتون یومانت خمشوشی بان بس خادن از زودت لیومانت لوشی با اسرا پلیه التریه سر و هرت خدمت خیری خای خیت دستت ارزه لوشی بان شوال اجا بلیل هجتت اشری خادوت لقد بار خدانا را با یارختا کووید رام دیان لیلویان in person Bible study و عده بتعویلن دکلی هیوی قدام سخچون تن شریک خاموی دال مقبولنا قد Calvary Chapel بتعویل خمنس Conference مارچ شواسر هل جاسر شارویلا شاوترا رویتا هل خوشی به مرشه کم سیتون خیومه کانفرنس آتیتون ل کانفرنس بتویا یو کونونیا کانفرنس سنتر یو واتسونویل چول قد اینا شنت های سکول یا اولول چمسی شریکی یو ده کانفرنس همزمانه بتاوه پاستر کن گریوز و رجستریشن بتپتخه متخد خا شبت من عاده این بوزود مادانو تا بایتون یادیتون بس مالخون باقیتون من اشالادی مر چامس افغانوز بت ازل و چامس بوزود مادانو تا بازده منس کانفرنس مارچ 17 هل جاسر قطعون یابل ادیت لی اربام اخباریات مفشمانم بس مالخون مشموم متقارنون قطعون به باشم تا مقبور وقت اخونن ژاک خوبیار شونیل الخیا بدیای بیومد شبت شواب جانیوری یوم دیتت تورلاک تشمشتد ناخه بتهویا بیاد کلپد اخچی یعنی پرایوت ایله بیومد خمشوشی به جاسر به جانیوری اینا این بسمالو خون خامیمون لن گسلاواتو خون هاویتون باسیمه ماریا بارخلو خون مقبران اینا جورج و جان خوبیار اخواتد نخه امبنه بیته على مانخله وعلى يبل لبقى چلپد به همس آیا به باشم تا مقبور وقت بچانت نخه فرانکلین خوبیار شونیله بیومد آرپوشی با تریسر با اکتبر مخلط تریسر به جانیوری جو بیت یانو جو هیوسن قد قرباب تورلاکلا لودان نخه بید هویتش مشته بیومد خمشوشی با جاسر به جانیوری ساعت 3 بارچاوت را جو آواند ایتد هیوی برختت آتورای تورلاک قد ادرسو ایلا اموسی خمشه ساوث اورنج ستریت که تورلاک من بار خوتامت تشمشته بد قبلخ سقبران قیبلت لبا جو آواند عمرت متخرب الله مقبران اینا بناتد نخته والانتین ناخد مخلط بناتد ناخه والانتین امبارزو یو آلبرت و تاتیانا خوبیار یمو هدی مشولو شرکتوخم بتویا التد يبلت اللبا قاتا على ما نخلي على يب اللبا قدا كلبا به همس آیا مغبور واخ قد تشمشتد نخم آتور خنانیشو قیوم داوارد آتورای یومتفد ناموسای یعنی پارلمنت ایران به شکل شوپس آتت خدسر به سپرا بیومد اسریشاوا به جانیوری جو عمرد بدقور تورلاک من بار تشمشت سپیتا بتهاوی خورزد رومرامد نخا با آواند لارسا و بتوتد نخا بت قبل ناشي قبسمت الريشة ويبلتد لبا من ساتت خا هل أربا برشاوترا مخبراني نا هدامد بتوتد نخا على ما نخلي وعلى يبل لبا قيش البتو مخبرت خارتا إلى باشمت يورتا مخبور واخ بوچانتد يمن مغبتا نختا كيتي مايليان أني تشونيلا الخيابة ديناي بيومت شبتا شوا به جانوری گمدیت سانوزه تشمشت نخته بتهویا بیومد طلوشی با شوا سر به جانوری طلوشی بیتایل ساتت خبر چاوترا جو عمر دیت دی ونگلتت آتورایت سانوزه عمر دیان من بار خلمت تشمشتم نخته بت پیش سوپیتا لحقوتو جو اوکل مموریال پارک و هیگه قبلخ رخمه و سقبرانه قاقاوه و یولتد لبا مساتت لپلگه الخمشه پلگه جو آواند عمرد ایتت قاتولیقیتت آتورای چلدائی قد ایلال 109 North 1st Street جو کامبل مخبرانی اینا ناتت منخته آنا الخاص لویس بدیادگار آلیس گیبریل امنبته نوند نخته ادوارد و آلبرت گیبریل امنبته على ما نخله وعلى يبل لبا قدر كلبه ادي بايما طالبه ما نخوني قشال ادي بس مالو باقد لخه بوزود مدانو تا يبل قاتن بعضد همزمانا نوديو چاروزان نوديو باقد قشال ادي خامني زخشي بايما تخرن قد أنا إنجلس بسوري بترجمة قد شد قد باي جامسيتون طالبيتون headset بچارزود.
Thank you Joey. رتخت جوی مره تنخار خسوجل إجازة يبيتون أنا قمت إنجلس خشة مدنا قاتوخون بر هذا بديشان سوري. It's a pleasure to have a good friend Neil Mammen, who's here with us with his daughter Mary Catherine and the rest of the family. Welcome. Just want to let you know a little bit about Neil. I met Neil about a couple of years ago when I went to a Value Advocacy Council. Used to meet once a month here at Calvary, and then Luke and his daughter ended up being in the same school, so we ended up becoming friends, and pretty soon we found out got a lot of interesting. So Neil used to live in California, but now he's gone to Idaho, but he comes down every time here. I found that he's here. I thought get an opportunity for him to come. So Neil's basically an engineer by trade during the day, and during the night he's an apologist, and he has an organization called No Blind Faith. He's got a BS electrical engineering, computer engineering. He's got a master's electrical engineering, solid state physics. He's a founder of 4 startup companies. He's the CEO of American Family Network. He was the CTO of the 10 Maker System Consulting Group, VP and R&D Propulsion Networks, CTO and VP of Engineering of Nuclear Information System, and he was an instructor at UC Berkeley for about 7 years. But more importantly than that, he's an ordained evangelical pastor. Great to have him here. He's a founder of No Blind Faith Ministry. It's an apologetic and evangelism. You'll see his skills on display today. They're pretty exciting, great. He's the president of Valley Advocacy Council, founder of annual Silicon Valley Prayer Walk. He's on the planning team of Connect Silicon Valley, and he's had 7 years of junior high ministry, 9 years singles ministry, and he's an international preacher and speaker. And he's on the radio also. You can see his programs, and he's got a lot of YouTube videos. If you watch him on any subject in apologetics about Christ, he's on there. He was born in Ghana in Africa, from Indian family, and his grandparents were evangelicals, but of all of his family, he's the only one who's an evangelical. He's writing, so his family consists of Marxist, socialist, communist, atheist, and past chairman of the World Council of Churches. That's not a good thing. A libertarian theology organization. As an active free market patriot, he's sort of a black sheep of the family. We're glad to have him here. And recently he was working with Dolby Laboratories, a designer of a Dolby Vision monitors. He's got about 40 patents on electronic awards. He's got multiple awards. He's got a 2019 Hollywood Luminary Award. I think that's a French word. Anyway, he's author of multiple books. One of them is called Jesus is Involved in Politics, Water and Jew, Why Isn't Your Church? And the other one that I've got, he's got a book called 40 Days Toward a More Godly Nation. It's a 40 days devotional, so I got permission from him. I'm going to copy day one. He's got 1, 2, 3. Day one is about 4 days. I have a copy of the first day. If you let me know, give me your name or address, I'm going to send it to you. Just read the first day. Then you would know, do you want to read this book or not? It's great to have Neil here. I appreciate his presence. I forgot one thing I forgot to say. There was another announcement. This Thursday, there is starting a 12-week course adventure. Tim Lundy and Steve Clifford are going to teach what's called a Better Man. It's a big program, 12 sessions. Starts at 6:15 a.m. They do have coffee and donuts. I'm planning on attending. Let me know if you are. It'd be a good thing to start. Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause to Neil as he comes up.
Okay, wow. Nice to see you guys. Thank you, Pastor. It's I always forget what's in my bio. I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot that was in there. Actually, I do want to correct that. I'm not the only evangelical in my family. There are a few of us there. We've got a few pastors in that group too. But let me start by introducing the Values Advocacy Council, because I think that's an important reason. I come here, I fly back every month. I ended up being blacklisted in Silicon Valley, and I couldn't get a job anymore. So we decided we might as well go to Idaho, where it was cheaper to live. I'd interviewed with a whole bunch of companies and just wasn't getting any jobs. And I thought, oh, maybe I'm just getting old. And then somebody said, no, you're on a blacklist. They're not going to hire you because they just Google your name and they find you are active. So one of the things I'm really active in is with the VAC. And the VAC is an organization that wants Christians to be involved in legislation. And the reason we say that is because all of God's laws were given to us to protect us. So when you go out here and you see a stop sign, the stop sign isn't there so that you don't have fun. The stop sign is there for what? To protect you and to protect others from you. So in the same way, every single one of God's laws are not there to stop you from having fun, but to protect you and to protect others from you. So if we have a nation that legislates laws that violate God's moral laws, what's going to happen? People are going to suffer. But who's going to suffer first? Not the rich, not the powerful, but the poor and the widow and the orphan and the disenfranchised, right? So it's very important that we understand that God's laws are there to protect us and others. And so in that sense, we want Christians to be involved in legislation or in politics. And so there's a flyer back there you can pick up if you're interested on the way back. It says, child prostitution and slavery should still be legal. And there's a question mark. And then it says, that's effectively what your pastor and friends are saying if they say they should not be involved in politics. And I say, let me explain that. You see, if you say Christian churches or pastors should not be involved in politics, you're essentially saying that child sexual abuse should still be legal. It sounds harsh, but the truth is much harsher than that. Because if you take a stance against being actively involved in politics, then you're basically also saying that death games and forced temple prostitution should also be legal. How can I say that? Well, look at this partial list. Slavery, racism, segregation, kidnapped brides, death games, gladiatorial combat, infanticide, child labor, child abandonment, child prostitution, child sexual abuse, child marriage, the superstitious killing of twins, elder abandonment, widow burning on their husband's funeral pyres, cruelty to prisoners, and cruelty to animals, all these would still be legal if Christians were not involved in politics. Because every one of those, and thousands, I've just listed a few of them, every one of those and thousands of laws throughout history were changed because a pastor and a church just like this said, this is a bad thing, we need to stop it. And they got involved, sometimes with leaders who hated them, sometimes with kings who wasn't sure what was going on. Like, for instance, it was legal in Scandinavian countries to kidnap a woman and force her to marry you. Until a pastor in their church went to the king and said, this is a bad thing, we need to pass a law against it. It was legal to have slaves in England until a pastor named John Newton, who wrote Amazing Grace, the song, he convinced William Wilberforce and a man named Thomas Clarkson to go around England. And it took them 40 years for their church, and their church was a gathering place for everyone, to stop and ban slavery in England. And then years later, that movement came here, and they started a new party. I won't tell you the name of it. You should know the name of the party. They started a new party founded by Christians for the express purpose of eliminating slavery. So that's what our organization does. We try to educate you. We want you to be involved, and it's very powerful. We're doing that in many places. We're expanding. So please take a flyer and take a look at it, and it'll kind of give you. But today we're going to talk about the fall of Jericho. I teach apologetics, and apologetics is the defense of Christianity using facts, logic, reason, philosophy, science, and archaeology and history. So I want to go through that. And as I start this, I want to ask you a question. Is it more of a miracle for God to say, let there be an earthquake and start an earthquake? Or is it more of a miracle for God to create the entire universe and create the earth and the movement of the continents and everything millions of years or thousands of years before in such a way that when something happens that a man does, the earthquake happens at just the right time? Which is a greater miracle? That entire timing process is far greater. So I want you to think of that as we go through. And my premise is the Bible isn't a legendary storybook. It's a historical document supported by archaeological data. And to do that, we're going to focus on the fall of Jericho. Now, we don't have too much time today, so I won't take the time to read the account of the fall of Jericho in the Bible, but it's in Joshua chapters 2 and 3, and I recommend that you do read it afterwards to check and make sure that I'm telling you the truth. Because with apologetics, you never want to trust anybody until you verify it. And you also don't want to trust me until you verify what I'm saying. So what's happening in that story? Well, let's go back a bit. After having a very pleasant chat with Pharaoh, Moses was able to tell him to let my people go, right? And they get out of Egypt, and he gets the 10 Commandments, and then they have that whole thing with the golden calf, remember that, right? And then he feeds them throughout the trek of the desert, and they come to the land of Canaan, and they've seen God do miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle, and they get to the land of Canaan, and they chicken out. They're like, yeah, you did all these miracles, but these guys are giants. I don't want to go in there, right? So God says, he says that not a single one of them over the age of 20 will see the promised land. Except, of course, the 2 spies who were faithful, Caleb and Joshua. So he sends them off to their wilderness for 40 years. So let's look at this. Here's the Middle East. You guys are very familiar with this. This is the area about the Middle East. We're going to zoom in on that square. The blue smiley faces and the red smiley faces have nothing to do with this talk, but the red smiley faces are where I grew up. I grew up in Yemen and Sudan and Ethiopia, right? And the blue smiley faces is where I've traveled with my wife or my parents, because we traveled a lot, as you can imagine. My dad was a professor in physics. He was an atheist and a communist until I was about 5, and then he became a Christian. And so I grew up in a Christian home. But my cousins all back home were all Marxists, so every time we went back to India, it was always a discussion of which Marxist party to join. Go figure. Anyway, so here's the journey. Now this is the Middle East. There you can see that Egypt is over there, And then we have Mount Sinai, the Sinai Peninsula, and the land of Canaan, and then there was Jericho's where the big star is. Now, you have to understand something. The distance from Egypt to Canaan is only 230 miles. So if they were walking only at 6 miles a day, it would have taken them 40 days to get across there, not 40 years. So you can see they were right near where they needed to go, yet they took 40 years to get there because God was going to teach them something. See, God needed to take this ragtag group of people because they were slaves for so many years, right? They were not established. They were informed. And God often will use events in our lives to prepare us. It's rare that God will say, boom, I'm going to appoint you to do this and you'll be able to do it. Usually what he does is he lets you grow into that position. And think about it. Look at David. David wasn't ready to be king, but what did he do before he became king? He spent years sitting next to Saul, playing the lyre, while Saul was doing his kingdom stuff. And David was learning all that time, and God was preparing David. And God does that all the time with us. Sadly, he does it all the time with me. So I wish that wasn't the case, but it always is the case. So he's trying to clean them up, and he's not trying. He's saying he is cleaning them up, and he's creating them to be this tremendous warrior force that they're going to be. So he gets them ready, and he gets them ready to go. So here we are in the Promised Land. This is another view. I like putting all these views so you can kind of see the different views there are. And they're on their way there, and they get there. So, but there was a problem when they got there, right? You see, way back when Jacob had left the Promised Land and gone to Egypt. Remember that, right? The children of Israel, the children of Jacob had moved to Egypt with Joseph. And over the years, the 12 sons of Jacob had multiplied into the 12 tribes of Israel. But meanwhile, back in Canaan, what was happening? People had moved into the land, and they were farming it. Now, God wanted this to happen because he didn't want the land to be so wild and desolate and not ready. He wanted the Israelites to move in, and they already have farmland that they could just cultivate. Otherwise, they'd have to start from scratch. So he's designed it in this way. But when they get there, the people there are very evil. I mean, these are the kind of people who sacrifice babies to Baal. And it's kind of a horrific thing that they would do. They would actually take the idol of Baal, and they would heat up the idol made of brass or metal or whatever, and then they would take living babies and sacrifice them on the hands of the idol, and they would make loud chants so that people would not hear the screams of the babies. These were the kind of people that were there, and God says we need to eliminate them completely. So they come to the land of Jericho, and they camp out there. They are about 6 miles from Jericho, and they send him some spies, right? So this is where we take the story up. Now, when you read Joshua 2 and 3, here are the things that you find out in the Bible. So if we don't have time to go through it, do read it and check me. But here's what the Bible claims. One, that the Jordan River was in a flood stage. Two, Jericho, the city of the Israelites crossed the overflowing Jordan River, and it dried up for them. Right? Number 3, Jericho was strongly fortified, and it had walls around it. Number 4, Joshua sends 2 spies who meet Rahab. Number 5, Rahab lives within the wall of Jericho. Number 6, she hides them in the flax drying on her roof. And number 7, she lets them out of the city after the gates are locked through a window over the walls. Number 8, the Israelites are told to march around the city once a day for 6 days and 7 times on the last day. Number 9, the walls come down without the aid of human hands or bulldozers. Number 10, each man went straight up into the city, and they use that words, went straight up into the city. The attack occurred, number 11, the attack occurred just after during the harvest time. Number 12, the siege was short. It wasn't a long siege. Usually when you have a siege on a city, it's a long siege because you have to storm them out. In this case, it was very short. And 13, the city was not plundered except for the gold and silver, but not for goods. So not for food, not for things like that, and not for pottery or anything like that. And finally, number 14, the city was burned to the ground. This is what the Bible claims. So the question is, did this really happen? I was once, before I was married, there was this friend of mine who introduced me to this really cute Jewish girl, right? Now, I was not in the habit of dating non-Christians, so we just went out for coffee or something. And I remember that I was chatting with her, and she said, "Oh, I'm teaching in my synagogue tomorrow." I said, oh, great, what are you teaching? She said, oh, I'm teaching the story of Jericho. I said, great, that's wonderful. Are you going to tell them all that happened? She goes, well, you know it's a myth. I'm like, what? You're teaching from the Bible and you're going to teach these kids that it's a myth? She goes, oh, yeah, it's just a myth. It can't have happened. And I realized that I got to do some research because I didn't have all the answers for it. And this is what happens all the time. Is that I get in a discussion with someone and I try to rebut them and I go, oh, I don't have all the information. So I go back and I do the research. Right? So that's the way you want to be. You want to be at the point where you do the research and then later on you'll get in the same conversation with someone and you'll have an opportunity. Right? So I went back and I did the research and this talk came out of that challenge that she'd given me that the story of Jericho was just a myth. So is it a myth? Is the Bible telling the truth? I mean, these are some amazingly supernatural things. The walls of Jericho fall down. Wow, that's just super. Couldn't have happened. It's just a myth. So, and her thing was, well, the story was told, and then the next generation embellished it, and the next generation embellished it, and the next generation embellished it, and that's how it came to be. That was what she was saying. But I'm claiming that the Bible isn't a legendary storybook. It's a historical document supported by archaeological data. But is that true? So let's go through it. Let's start with the first obstacle. The river was in a flood stage. The River Jordan was a flood stage. The first point is, does the River Jordan ever get into a flood state? I mean, if you've seen the River Jordan, it's not a very big river, right? I mean, it's not that wide. I mean, you think, well, you can cross the Jordan anytime, right? And it turns out that during the harvest time, the Jordan swells up from winter rains. Now, are we talking about mild swelling? No, this is what we're talking about, right? This is the Jordan River. So the Bible claims that they crossed the river despite the flood. And we must understand that according to the text, crossing the Jordan River was not done at a very shallow or slim spot on the river. It was done at a deep enough spot that a structure of 12 big stones could have been set there and not be seen once the river folded up, because it built this set of 12 stones. And it was wide enough that a slew of priests carrying an ark, remember that could fit in there fully, because the ark had to fit into the Jordan River, and then people walked around it. And of course, you have to remember that a few thousand years later, John the Baptist baptizes Jesus in this very river. In fact, somewhere very close to the spot. So, which would mean that even during the non-flood season, it's deep enough that you can baptize people. Okay, so they get to the Jordan River. Actually, I thought we had let me go back here. I thought we had a video right here. Is that not running? Maybe not. Okay. Well, unfortunately, I have a video that shows the Jordan River, and it's so intense, there's no way you can cross the Jordan River, because if you did that, you would drown, right? So this is not a small part of the river. It's a wide enough place. It's a place where you can't, and this is an average spot. I didn't pick the best spot, right? So the Bible says explicitly in Joshua chapter 3:16, it says that the waters came down from above, stood and rose up in a heap far off at Adam, the city that is beside Zarazan, and those flowing down the sea of Arabah, the salt sea, that's the Dead Sea, were wholly cut off, and the people passed over opposite Jericho. Right? So what it's saying is that all of a sudden, when the priest's feet hit the water stopped, and it was dry land. Now, wow, that's like the parting of the Red Sea. I mean, is that really happening? So this is where it would have happened, right? You see the red spot right there? Okay, now you see that yellow spot up there, the yellow circle up there? It turns out that we have seen times when the Jericho has stopped flowing. Many times, in fact. In fact, historians and archaeologists have summarily discarded this occurrence as mere superstition, but the fact of the matter is geophysicist Amin Noor said, today the old city of Adam, that's the one in the Bible, is now the modern-day town of Damia, the site of the 1927 mudslides that cut off the flow of the Jordan. Such cutoffs typically last 1 to 2 days and have also been recorded in AD 1906, 1834, 1546, 1267, and 1160. So another Arab historian called Novari also wrote about a 1267 mudslide that did the same thing. You see, what happened here is quite simply this. somehow miraculously at the right time, when the priest's feet hit the water, there ends up being a mudslide that happened prior to their feet hitting the water. So the water starts slowing down, and by the time they get there, it's dry land. Now, by dry land, we don't mean it's not wet anymore. We're meaning that they can actually walk because the water is not pooling around them. And then, amazingly, when everybody crosses and the priests leave the water, boom, the water comes rushing back. Now, let me ask you this. Which is the greater miracle? That God has arranged an earthquake-type mudslide that happens at precisely the right time, that clears at precisely the right time, or God says, stop with the water, let the water go. I would say it's far greater to manage the entire ecosystem of the earth and the globe and the continental plates. So this is an archaeologically provable event. Okay, let's move to Jericho. They then camp on the eastern border of Jericho, and this is Jericho from the air. Now, as you can see from these photos, it doesn't look very big. It's kind of small. And it actually covers only about 12 acres of land, which is less than a mile around the city. But you'll see this is a necessary thing, because if it was more than a mile around the city, this would be a very different story. So here's a trick question, by the way. How many times did the Israelites march around the city? People want to say 7, right? It's 13 times. 13 times. Why? Because they marched around. Well, we'll come back to that. Okay. So first of all, so Jericho was strongly fortified. All right. This is kind of a recreation of it. This is how it looked. Jericho is strategically located. Now, normally, if you're building a city to be fortified, you try to build it on a hill. Why? Because you want an upland. I'll show you how that works. So there's usually a little, this is part of the hill that's fortified, and then that's the actual wall. So you've got 2 walls in a sense, and that's how Jericho was. The wall part of the city was not huge. It was about 400 feet by 1,000 feet. And the reason why Jericho was so strategic is that this was a high place in Canaan. And from there, you have access to the heartland of Canaan. So this was a very strategic military place that they needed to get. Any military force attempting to penetrate the central hill country would have to capture Jericho first. And so Joshua wanted to do this first. And it was a very logical thing. So let's look at the archaeological fortifications of Jericho. First question, was there a Jericho? Was there a city wall? Yes, there was. In fact, there was a lady named Kathleen Kenyon who was not a believer. She didn't believe the Bible was accurate. She was a skeptic and started doing some digging in Jericho, in the blue and brown areas are some of the places where she did dig some of her digging. They found the Jericho foundations. And this is what they found. She basically found out that the fortification system consisted first of a stone revetment wall. So what that is a wall against the hill. Right? So that's the stone revetment wall. And this wall was up to 8 feet. They found up to 8 feet of this. So the original may have been taller than 8 feet. In actual fact, though, the bricks in the area were sufficient for a second upper wall that was 6.5 feet, followed by a 12-foot wall. So we're talking about an 18.5-foot wall. So these guys weren't fooling around, right? So you've got this 6.5 feet wide wall, 6.5 feet wide, and so you've got a 15 feet wall at the bottom, 8 feet tall, 6.5 feet wide wall. And this is what it looks like. So you're up on a hill, so you can see that, and I've just put for scale there, you can see the puny, insignificant Israelites standing right there at the bottom of the wall. So imagine this, you come up to the city, and this wall is going up, 15 plus 8, 23 feet. And it's 6 feet wide. And how are they supposed to get through this? Now, here's another zoom in of the photo, right? You can see the revetment wall, the hill above, and you can see that whole thing. Now, notice that the mud bricks are not seen in the picture. Where are the mud bricks? Where did they go? How did they know where they were? And we'll have to get that. So Kenyon found out that there were 2 levels of fortification. It turns out that not only was there an outer wall, there was also an inner wall. Which is very interesting that they had 2 walls. So once you get through the first outer wall, there was a second wall inside, right? So you can see those 2. Now, let's go back to our list. So if you look at this, the flood was in a valid state valid. The Israelites crossed the overriding Jordan River. That's possible. Jericho was strongly fortified. That's proven because we showed you the building, the walls there. Okay. Now it says that Joshua sent 2 spies who meet Rahab. Okay. Now this seems, and then it says Rahab lived within the wall. The Bible says Rahab lived within the wall. Now this seems unusual. Why would you have people living within a wall that was a protection wall? And then she lets the spies down through a rope by the wall. Now, this seems unusual, right? So a lot of skeptics say, no, nobody would have built a home within the protection wall. Well, then they found this. You can see from that we have the house would have extended above the wall. We have the brick wall that's 8 feet. You've got the puny insignificant archaeologists, and you have the stone revetment wall. So we have proven evidence that there were houses that were built right against the wall, and they were actually overlooking the wall. Now this was the outer wall. So this would put Rahab somewhere like that. Now, why would you have an outer wall and an inner wall? Well, you'd have the inner wall, and that's where all the rich people would live, and all the poor people would live in the outer wall because that was cheaper, less desirable property, right? Because, in fact, the evidence showed that the houses built on the rampart appeared to have comprised the poor quarter of the city because they had walls that were very thin, and their pottery and debris were of the cheaper kind. So the archaeology shows that, hey, this is a poor class of people, and this would match the fact that Rahab was not a rich person, but rather a prostitute living in the seedier part of town, right? Again. So notice how the wall would be so close to the wall that the second floor would be about the 8-foot wall, and you can just drop that red cord over it. Okay, so now what do we have? We have Joshua sends 2 spies, possible. Rahab living in the wall, possible. Proven. She hides them in the flax strong in the roof. We're going to have to come back to that. And she lets them out of the city after the gates are locked through a window over the wall. So that's proven. But 6 we've not proven yet. So you see how these things are falling in place? Again, archaeology. I'm not saying that we have to believe this on faith. I'm just saying the archaeology is proving it. Okay, let's keep going here. Now, number 8 and 9. The walls, the Israelites are told to march around the city once a day for 6 days and 7 times on the last day. The walls came down without the aid of human hands or bulldozers, and each man went straight up into the city. So let's look at number 8. Now, if you want to go through a city wall, what are your options? 1, you have to dig under the wall. B, you have to starve the people in the city. And 4, you have to knock the walls down. Sorry, that's from Home Alone, that numbering system. Never mind. If you've not seen Home Alone, you don't understand the joke. Anyway, so these are your options, right? So let's study all of them. Number 1, you have to dig under the wall, right? Now, this is quite difficult because the city is on a hill, and it's built to be protected on a hill, so you can't really dig under a wall because what are you going to do? You have to go dig through the hill and then up the hill and then up into the poorer quarter, right? So that would mean you have to dig there, and meanwhile, it would take days, and meanwhile, the Jerichonians would be sitting there ready to shoot with their archery, with their bows or spears, anyone who came up through the hole. It's not going to work, right? So that doesn't work. So that gives you 2 options. Starve the people inside the city. Well, you could do this, but how long would that take? Months. Now, when did they say that they came upon the city? During harvest time. So how much food is in the city? A lot of food. In fact, enough food for the next year. They'd be sitting there for a year waiting for them to starve. Meanwhile, what are the Israelites doing? They're starving. They don't have food, right? So that's not going to work. And so we'll see evidence, too, that this does not work. So, what do we have left? Amen, right? So what do we have left? We can knock the walls down. Now, this too is very difficult. But what does the Bible say? It says the walls fell flat so that people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. But here's the deal. If I knock the walls down, which way would, here's the city right here, and here are the Israelites. If I knock the walls down, the walls would knock into the city. But that's not what we found. And if they knocked the walls into the city, they would have to climb that 12-foot hill, right? and then the 8-foot wall was building up a bigger clump. They'd have to make their way through the debris of that thing to climb over that, and while they're stumbling over all the bricks, guess what's going to happen? The Jerichonians are going to attack them. Right? And while you're knocking the wall down, what are they going to do? They're going to pour hot oil on you and throw cows at you. If you ever watch Monty Python, you'll see what they say. But anyway, but you can see Jericho was well fortified, well planned. This was not an amateur organization. They knew what they were doing. So the question is, how did the Israelites get into the city? Did something supernatural happen? Well, before we do that, let's read Joshua 6:20, right? This is the picture. Like if I knock the walls down, they're going to go in. It's going to be tough, right? So let's read. The Bible claims says the walls came falling down, and what does the Bible say? The Bible says the walls fell flat. Let me go back here again. The walls fell flat. Yeah, too fast. So that people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. So what does the Bible claim? The Bible claims the walls came down without the aid of human hands or bulldozers, and each man went up into the city. Now, how do you prove that walls were dropped by God? Well, you could prove it if you notice this. See, they found out that the mud bricks fell and were found at the bottom of the wall. In other words, mud bricks were found at the bottom of the store. Remember those missing mud bricks that we didn't see? They are under the feet of this guy standing there. And they found a lot more mud bricks. In fact, the mud bricks fell and at the bottom of the wall, and I stole this from some guy, so, and here's what we're seeing. Basically, what you're seeing is right here. We've got this is the revetment wall, and then there's a wall that goes up here, right? These bricks fell inside and filled up this space. Somehow, this wall, rather than falling, these bricks not fell inside, fell outside and filled up this space. I got misdirected, right? So this wall falls down and fills up this space. So this is their revetment wall, and this is their wall, and then it falls this way. And guess what this happened? What do you see here? What do you see here? You see a ramp up into the city. How do you prove that God did something? One is you prove that the walls fell outward, not inward. And two, the walls created a ramp. And this again is the archaeological evidence. And this is from Kathleen Kenyon, who was not a believer. She says, amazingly, she's surprised. She says, above the fill associated with the curb wall, during which the final middle bronze bank remained in use, was a series of tip lines against the face of the revetment wall. The first was a heavy fill of fallen red mud bricks, piling nearly to the top of the revetment wall. These red bricks probably came from the wall on the summit of the bank. So she's saying the walls fell out and created a ramp. So this is basically what happened. We have this wall. Somehow it falls outward at the right time, and the Israelites go up into the city. This is from a magazine. I got this. I actually met the author who went back there and did some research on that, and he took a lot of these pictures and gave them to me. So not only does God drop the walls, he also creates a ramp for them to walk into the city. See, the Bible isn't a legendary storybook. It's a historical document supported by archaeological data. So here's what's going on. These guys are marching around the city, and suddenly they go, oh, wait, here's a ramp right into the city. Now, how could that have happened? Well, maybe before the beginning of time, God engineered an earthquake to happen. Now, he could have just gone bam. Or he could have used an earthquake, which, as I said, is a bigger miracle. And it happens exactly the precise time after they're walking around the city, the 13th time, or the 7th time on the 7th day. So, the mudslide to block up the Jericho happens at the exact time. And then exactly 7 days later, the Israelites happen to coincidentally march around the 7 times and blow their horns. And right as they blow horns, there's another earthquake that drops the city, and they walk right up into it. No hand grenades, no rocket launchers, no explosives. They take the city. Something happened here and it matches the Bible. Multiple coincidences and incidences happen at the same time. I would say this is a miracle. But it's beautiful about this is a miracle that's verifiable by physical facts. Okay, number 11. So those all are valid. 8 is valid, 9 is valid, 10 is valid. Let's look at 11. The attack occurred just after or during harvest time. So let's turn our attention to that. Let's see what Joshua chapter 5 says. It says, on the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. So when is Passover? Harvest time, right? The day after Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land. Now, if you could eat some of the produce of the land, that means it was harvest time, right? There's produce. Unleavened bread and roasted grain. Grain from the land, because they're not carrying the grain from Egypt, right? For 40 years, right? And they're not growing it out in the wilderness. The day after the Passover, they ate some of the produce of the land. And then verse 12, the manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate of the produce of Canaan. So it says that they are now at harvest time, okay? Then, the next verse talks about Rahab. Rahab says, but she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of the flax, and that she had laid out on the roof. Now, when would you put flax out on the roof? In the winter? No, right after harvest. What is flax? Flax is the stalks that you have after you've harvested the grain, you've taken the grain, it's all those stalks, and then you can make hay out of it, you can make roofs out of it, you use it for a lot of things, you can make clothes out of it, so that's why the flax would be there. And so you know that, when's it going to be? It's going to be around harvest time, right? Okay, so this is what the Bible claims, it was harvest time. Well, Brian Wood, and this is the archaeologist I met, and he says this. The most, and this says this about Jericho when they excavated, the most abundant item found in the destruction, apart from pottery, was grain. As noted above, both Garsang and Kenyon found large quantities of grain stored in the ground floor rooms of the houses. In one small area, Kenyon recovered 6 bushels of grain. To find such an extensive amount of grain is exceptional. It's obvious that the city fell to the invaders shortly after what? The harvest. Because otherwise they would have eaten a lot of that grain. The fact that they had so much grain. So, what do we have? We've got the rivers, number 6, we went back to 6. She hides them in the flax drying on the roof. So obviously that would be a very valid possibility that there would be flax on the roof because it's at harvest time when that city was destroyed. Okay. And then that brings us to number 12. The siege was short. Now, if the siege was long, what would happen? There would be less food. The fact that there was more food, and they had lots and lots of grain. And here's some pictures of it. We have grain pictures. There was grain all over the city. But it proves 2 things. 1, there was grain all over the city, and 2, the Israelites did not take it, or whoever attacked the city. And this is very unusual. If you go attack a city and you destroy everything, you're going to take everything you can. And yet they did not. The Bible says the city was under siege for 7 days, right, before it fell, and the archaeological data proves that to be true. The archaeological data proves the Bible to be accurate. The attack occurred around harvest and the siege was short. So the Bible is not a legendary book. It's a historical document supported by archaeological data. Okay, let's keep going. Number 13. The city was not plundered except for the gold and silver, but not for goods, not for grain, not for silverware, not for pottery or anything like that. And then they burnt the city to the ground. So let's go back to the period of the grain. If you look at this, you'll notice that the grain is burnt. Brian did not have a color picture of this. I asked him, I said, Frank, do you have a color? He says, no, we only have a black and white picture. I'm like, okay. So you can see in here that it is burnt grain. Grain was a very valuable commodity, and any invader to take over a land would take the grain with them. But it did not happen because they were told to destroy it. So, Kathleen Kenyon, again, not a believer, she says the destruction was complete Walls and floors were blackened or reddened by fire. Every room was filled with fallen bricks, timbers, and household utensils. In most rooms, the fallen debris was heavily burnt, but the collapse of the walls of the eastern room seemed to have taken place before they were affected by fire, meaning that the walls had fallen and then the fire started. Because somebody will say, oh, no, there was a fire and that's why the walls fell. No. The walls fell, then the fire, and this proves that the walls fell and then the fire. And here are the burnt walls. And so we can see that the Bible says, then they burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. And we can also leave out the thing that Jericho was abandoned because people were like, oh, I'm not living in Jericho anymore. We're going to a new city because the commerce had gone down. Why? Because they would have taken their grain with them and all their stuff, but they didn't. Why? Because the Bible isn't a legendary storybook. It's a historical document supported by archaeological data. So let's summarize the facts. We've gone through all of them. The city was in a flood state. Is that valid? Yes. The Israelis crossed the whole flowing Jordan River and dried up for them? Possible. Jericho was strongly fortified? Proven. Joshua sends 2 spies who meet Rahab? Possible. Rahab lived within the wall? Proven. She hides them in the flax drying on the roof? Valid. She lets them out of the city after gates are locked through a window of the walls? Proven. The Israelites are told to march around the city once a day for 6 days and 7 times on the last day? Valid. The walls came down without the aid of human hands or bulldozers? Proven. Each man went straight up into the city? Proven. The attack occurred just after during harvest time? Proven. The siege was short? Proven. The city was not plundered except for the gold and silver, but not for goods, and the city was burned to the ground? Proven. Now, every one of those has been proven or possible or valid. And now when you go back to the Bible, and I go back to my Jewish friend, I never did go back to her because it took me a few months to figure this out, and I had lost touch with her by then. We can see that the Bible is indeed accurate. It is indeed historically backed. It is indeed correct. It is indeed a history book. So let me close with this. The Bible isn't a legendary storybook. It's a historical document supported by archaeological data. And this is just one piece of evidence about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you. So I wanted to say also that Neil being kind enough, I know he said a lot of stuff here, and this is archaeology. This is for your speculative friends who like history and archaeology. Neil is going to stick around after a few minutes. We're going to ask him, he's going to stay around. If you have question and answers, we're going to be in the social hall. Bring all your questions. Throw all the hard questions you were asking me that I said I'll talk to you later. Today is the day. Neil is quite gifted by God's grace. You will see talent on loan from God and a man who's faithful. And he's a scientist, so he's got great questions. So feel free to stay. At the same time, today at 5 o'clock, is it 5 o'clock, Neil? 5:30. 5:30, he also has a group that he meets with, actually right here on Carter Avenue, 5151 Carter, the back of St. Timothy Church, where our church was, that he has a planned session talk about how do we know God exists. How do we know the will of God? Any of you who want to know what's the will of God, so you can show up there. But meanwhile, thank you very much, and you can stay, ask any questions. And I'm going to keep the doors locked. Don't let them go until everybody gets those questions answered. Thank you, Neil, again. We bless you. Let's pray. با این طلب من نخون خسام خون قد بیایتون عبیتون نیل دولخه بیایتون بغارا باقریتون جواب پریشه اخونن را با یلپان اتل ایتر بدهدون تا تنیون قد دوستو خون اودیوسات خمشه پلجه 5151 Carter Avenue, Tom up there, do English, ha group it how do you know the will of God? Dachit that is reside ala hamuila chedit lati. Sarah sluta. Ala hingura baban gadisha, bishakartot yantad min tayamaran, ket bgzaya vachiyamaran sarastutet hemizmanuch, piashla muzbitta. وبدواي وقت قد أني من ديان قد شمية وقت بغزاية وقت أو عجوبة وقت لنا أخجي متلياي إينا إلى سرستوتت هم زمان الديوخ علاهت بالخانة جو تشئيتا علاهت چل من دي جو إيدو خيلة و چل ديركشنت خيوتن و دوني جو دي ديوخ خيلة ياماران ساكر من قبار سوپت مخ أخوني نيل ياماران خلد يوبت پرسد يوبت و ياماران أدقد بيتال شروك من ديان ياماران برخت لقد شتلس منستريو ياماران بالخانة بعد جي في اي سي و نو بلايند فيت ياماران برخت له و پرست له بوزدوده و بوزدوده ياماران بداية وقت يومان چاتم قمپاتن نا أنا كت بغزاية من جو جيريكي موقبم لا ياماران بغزاية من قمپاتن إيتن جيريكوي بوش جوره قد بخشاب وقت ليبخ بودا مجر أني جويدانه بالتلخي إن عليه جرا آتن قولا يوبت و كل من دي قد قووم لي جويد ديوخي لي ون هيش من دي ليمس دج من آبت قد آتن لا تلخت لي ياماران إيتا أطرا أمتا الدنيا سابويا وقت جودوخ ياماران أويا قد روخت قد شد ديوخ ياماران بمهاديتا يوالا جرأت سرستوتت هم زمانوخ قد لنا بداية جداي زونت پشترا خچا ياماران قتيتوخ قد لنا بريقة بدمخ ياماران يطي إيتن خالاها شمو إلى ماران إيشم شيخا شاكر وقت شموخ باروخ والدايوما قد أبرسديو ببدا أديا شاپا قد ماران إيشم شيخا خوبت علاها بابا شو تبود روح قدشو يوم چود خامنن من عدي هل أبدا بدين آمين